we'll be addressing sometime later on in this meeting. We then advanced to discuss 7 financing. The first was Columbia University, the second was Cornell, the third was Fordham. Those were single approval financing documents. And after some discussion, we recommended that 3 of these financing be approved at today's board meeting. We then advanced to discuss the Sloan Kettering financing. Again, after some discussion, we recommended that advance at today's board meeting. We then proceeded to discuss 3 TELP financings. And again, after some limited discussion, we advanced to and we recommended approval. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. Any questions for Jerry before we move on? The board is being asked today to consider 3 single approval financings. Can we do the resolution now? Okay, I'm sorry. We need to vote the resolution now, as opposed to waiting until later. We've all had a chance to review the resolution. This is the minor revision in the Finance Committee charter. Has everybody seen this? Does everybody have a revision?
There was a red line. It was in the conduit. It was B1, Sandra. Right over here.
The words special obligation were added before bonds.
That was the old one.
Okay.
Right.
Make sure to clarify that our bonds are special obligation.
Right.
Are there any other questions concerning the resolution? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve it? Charlie, thank you very much. Second?
Second.
Sandra, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. As I was saying, we have 3 single approval financings to consider, and resolutions, therefore, will be presented by the President.
Good morning. Behind tab 3 is Columbia University transaction with David Ostrander presenting along with co-bond counsel John Bowe, Nixon Peabody, and Jay Lee, Rohin Lee.
Good morning.
Before you start, we'd love to
Yes.
David introduce our guest.
I am not Jay Lee.
I know.
I'm substituting for Jay Lee. I'm Vivian Rivera-Drohan from Drohan Lee.
Thank you very much for being here. David?
So, the board is being asked to adopt 2 series of tax-exempt and/or taxable fixed and/or variable rate bonds with terms not to exceed 31 years and an amount not to exceed $430 million on behalf of Columbia University. Bond proceeds will be used to finance numerous projects located throughout the Columbia University system. Specifically, we're looking at various construction, renovation, and site preparation projects related to the university's expansion into the Manhattanville campus, as well as renovation projects at the Morningside and Medical Center campuses. Those projects are provided in additional detail in attachment 1 of the staff report. And I'll note that the Manhattanville projects were also included in DASNY's 2012 and 2015 financings. Bond proceeds will also be used to refund all or a portion of DASNY Series 2006A and Series 2006B bonds. Assuming current market conditions, a total net present value savings in the range of $48.4 million or 17.7% of the refunded bonds is expected from the proposed refunding of the Series 2006A and Series 2006B bonds. The university is currently rated AAA by both Moody's and S&P, with both rating agencies assigning a stable outlook to the university. And accordingly, Columbia qualifies for an unsecured borrowing under DASNY's financing guidelines for independent institutions. Looking at the credit quality of Columbia, the university has experienced positive demand and enrollment trends and remains among the most selective universities in the country. Of the 36,250 applicants for fall of 2015, just over 2,000 were accepted, or an acceptance rate of only 6.1%. Columbia's operating margins have been very strong, averaging over $235 million over the past 5 years. And Columbia continues to report significant net assets, which exceed $13 billion as of fiscal year end 2015. Chairman.
David, thank you very much. Are there questions for David before we go to? Yes, Sam?
David, as always with Columbia projects in the neighborhood that it's in, there generally have been questions raised by the community and issues. I see that they've reached an agreement with the local development corporation there, and the state received a favorable ruling on eminent domain. Are there other community issues that are related to these specific projects, which don't sound particularly intrusive in the community compared to some of the other larger projects? But is there anything else lurking out there with local legislators, community groups?
There's not that we're aware of. There's no community opposition to these particular projects.
Good, thank you.
Senator, apropos of that, each of the last two TEFRA hearings that have been held for the prior Columbia transactions, no one showed up for the hearings, where they have in the past, where they've had
Oh,
concerns.
yes. And may I ask one other
Please.
question? Would you just confirm there is no extension of debt in the refunding?
There is no extension to that.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you, Sandra.
She asked the question.
Oh, did you? Thank you, Roman. Please, John.
Sure.
No, I'm glad.
David covered a good deal of what I'm going to cover, but you're being asked to adopt two series resolutions authorizing the issuance of bonds under a general resolution that was adopted by you in 2000 to finance projects and refinance projects for Columbia University. That resolution has been amended and restated as recently as, I believe, 2009. To put even more flexibility in to match some of the more recent resolutions that you've adopted since 2008. All of the bonds issued under that general resolution are on a parity with each other, all payable from loan repayments to be made by Columbia pursuant to a loan agreement that, again, was entered into in 2000 in connection with the adoption of that general resolution. It, too, to mirror some of the changes that were made in the general resolution, has been amended and restated so that they're in sync with each other. As David indicated, the credit rating for Columbia entitles it to an enhanced unsecured financing through the Dormitory Authority under the existing guidelines. And so there is no credit enhancement on the bonds, nor will the loan agreement obligations be secured by revenue pledges or mortgages on any of its real property. It's purely the general obligation, totally unsecured, with just their promise to repay. With that, I'll turn it over to Vivian, who will walk you through the series resolutions and what you're being asked to authorize.
Okay. Thank you. Each of the series resolutions authorizes the issuance of up to $430 million of authorized bonds for the purposes of, 1, financing the cost of a variety of capital improvements, 2, refunding all or a portion of the 2006 bonds, 3, paying the cost of issuance incurred in connection with the issuance of the authorized bonds. Both series resolutions provide that the aggregate principal of authorized bonds that may be issued pursuant to them may not exceed $430 million. Each of the series resolutions delegates to various officers of the authority the power, among others, to determine, with respect to the series of bonds authorized by it, the principal amount of authorized bonds to be issued, the date or dates on which such bonds will mature, the rate or rates at which the authorized bonds will bear interest, the purchase price to be paid for the authorized bonds, the redemption dates and prices of the bonds, whether any of the bonds will be subject to purchase in lieu of redemption, and the terms on which they may be purchased, whether any of the authorized bonds will be book entry bonds and the depository for them, and finally, the rights of and security of for any bank or insurance company providing a letter of credit or a financial guarantee. Each series resolution also authorizes various officers of the authority to prepare, execute, and deliver a preliminary and final official statement, execute a bond purchase agreement, to execute an agreement to provide continuing disclosure among the state university, the trustee,
Columbia.
Columbia, I'm sorry, the trustee and the authority, if required, in order for the underwriter and subsequent dealers to comply with Rule 15C2-12 and execute all other documents and do all things necessary or convenient in connection with the sale and the issuance of the applicable bonds.
Thank you very much. Are there questions for David, for John, or for Vivian?
Al, I'll just point out one more thing. There was a revised credit summary that went out to the board before the meeting. The lead manager on this transaction will be Goldman Sachs.
And I would just add that while two series resolutions are being adopted to provide flexibility to separate the transactions either in time or refundings from new money, there will be a separation of at least one of the refundings from the new money. So both series resolution authorizations will be used, though, and one series may be sold at a separate time than the other, so that it's treated for tax purposes as a different series of bonds rather than aggregated with the prior one. But the closings would be at the same time.
Okay. John, I actually have a question, and it's really for the record, to complete the record. On page 4 of the opinion of bond counsel, the last paragraph under the loan agreement, this loan agreement goes back to the early 2000s. And
2000, yeah.
2000, exactly. This paragraph describes the opportunity that the borrower has to either hire a management consultant under certain rating conditions or to establish a reserve fund. I'm assuming that, I've not seen that before, and I'm assuming that's a function of the negotiation back in.
Very much so. 2000 was when we moved to this set of documents, which removed some covenants that had been in loan agreements for the likes of Columbia, Rockefeller University, Cornell, where there were restricted transactions they were not permitted to do, particularly secured transactions without also giving DASNY a parity lien on whatever property they were securing another loan. All of that came out in 2000, and in its place for most of the borrowers was just this plain requirement that there will be a management consultant if you kind of not met some standards and raised some concerns for the authority, and then they would be obligated to implement whatever the recommendations were. Columbia was successful in their negotiations to say, well, we may not like everything that a consultant says we should do, and we want to have the ability then to secure the transactions in one way or another that's acceptable to DASNY. I mean, you have the controlling hand in terms of what you get as security if they don't want to do the management consultant recommendations, but they do have that option.
Okay, thank you. There being no further questions, may I have a motion, please, to approve the financing? Jerry, thank you. Is there a second?
Okay.
Sandra, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Behind tab 4 is the Cornell University transaction with David Ostrander presenting along with bond counsel Damon Pates of Oric, Harrington, and Sutcliffe.
Damon, how are you?
Morning.
Good.
The board is being asked to adopt one series of tax-exempt and/or taxable fixed and/or variable rate bonds in an amount not to exceed $165 million on behalf of Cornell University. Bond proceeds will be used to refund all or a portion of DASNY Series 2006 A bonds. Assuming current market conditions, the total net present value savings in the range of $34.3 million or 22.4% of the refunded bonds is expected from the proposed refunding of the 2006 A bonds. The plan is to issue tax-exempt fixed-rate bonds, and the fixed-rate Series 2006 A bonds that will be refunded reach final maturity on July 1st, 2035, and that final maturity will not be extended with this refunding. The university is currently rated AA1 by Moody's and AA by S&P, with both rating agencies assigning a stable outlook to the university. Accordingly, Cornell qualifies for an unsecured borrowing under DASNY's financing guidelines for independent institutions. Looking at the credit, demand for the university's undergraduate programs remains very strong, with applications increasing by over 15% since the fall of 2011. And Cornell has become increasingly selective, accepting only 15% of applications for fall of 2015. Cornell's revenue composition is extremely diverse. For fiscal year 2015, only 17% of the university's operating revenues came from net tuition and fees. Fundraising is also a strength of the university. The university's Cornell Now campaign raised over $6 billion through its conclusion in December of 2015, setting new records for both dollars raised and participation. And the impact of that fundraising, as well as investment returns over time, are reflected in the growth of the university's balance sheet. As of fiscal year end 2015, the university reported $7.1 billion of cash and investments, and total net assets reached a 5-year high of $9.5 billion. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, David. Questions for David before we move on to Damon? Damon?
Okay. I think Dave covered most of it, not much to add. Just to reiterate, this is a standard fixed rate refunding supplemental resolution we're asking you to adopt. Has all the standard DASNY terms. It provides for the bond purchase agreement, the disclosure agreement, also in the standard DASNY fashion. So this should be pretty straightforward.
Pretty vanilla.
Yeah.
Questions for Damon? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? John Johnson, thank you. Second? Adrian, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Behind tab 5 is the Fordham University transaction with David Ostrander presenting, along with co-bond counsel Christopher Weitzel of Squire Patton Boggs and Douglas Seaton of Seaton and Associates.
Chris, Doug, welcome.
The board is being asked to adopt 3 series of tax-exempt and/or taxable fixed and/or variable rate bonds with terms not to exceed 31 years and an amount not to exceed $175 million on behalf of Fordham University. Bond proceeds will be used to finance renovation projects on the university's Lincoln Center campus. The project consists of the reconstruction and renovation of an existing 4-story building located at 140 West 62nd Street on the Lincoln Center campus, which will include a new student center, expanded and upgraded library, as well as classroom, office space, and assembly space. Bond proceeds will also be used to refund all or a portion of DASNY's Series 2008B and Series 2011B bonds. Assuming current market conditions, a total net present value savings in the range of $11 million, or 11% of the refunded bonds, is expected from the proposed refunding of the Series 2008B bonds. The 2011B bonds were issued in a term rate mode and are subject to mandatory tender on July 1st, 2016. The plan is to issue only tax-exempt fixed-rate bonds, but the university would likely like to incorporate some stepped coupon bonds, which we've seen on a couple other recent DASNY transactions. Fordham is currently rated A2 by Moody's and A by S&P, both with stable outlooks. And in accordance with DASNY's recently revised financing guidelines, Fordham qualifies for an unsecured borrowing with a rating of A3, A- or better. And as such, the loan agreement will be a general unsecured obligation of the university. I'll note that under the previous financing guidelines with a rating of A2, the university would have been subject to a revenue pledge and a mortgage, as well as financial covenants. As far as the credit, demand for the university's programs has been strong, with applications increasing by over 34% over 5 years. FTE enrollment reached a 5-year high of 13,871 for the fall of 2015. Fordham continues to report strong operating results, with operating margins averaging over $28 million over the last 5 years. Like many universities in DASNY's portfolio, Fordham does rely heavily on tuition and fees and other student-related revenue. Tuition and fees accounted for approximately 66% of the university's total revenue for fiscal year 2015. Fordham's debt service coverage levels over the last 5 years have been very strong, averaging 3.2 to 1 since 2011. The proposed issuance is expected to have little to no impact on the university's debt service coverage, as the new money debt service will be offset by the savings from the refundings. Mr. Chairman.
David, thank you. Questions for David before we hear from Doug and Chris? Sandra, please.
David, again, a tight, sensitive neighborhood here that looks as though it's the same footprint as the existing building, so there's not controversy within the community
That's
there?
correct. It's all internal renovations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
I think we noted at yesterday's meeting, the 2011 bonds financed the new law school and the
Yes.
new dormitory, and it really was a great addition to the Lincoln Center area. It really was a nice.
Doug, Chris?
Before you for consideration is the adoption of 3 series resolutions authorizing individually and in the aggregate $175 million the authority's Fordham University revenue bonds. The bonds will be issued pursuant to a general resolution that was adopted in 2008. The proceeds of the bonds are expected to be used to finance the new money project that David described, and that's in an amount not to exceed about $20 million. The rest of the deal will be about $150 million or up to $150 million of refunding, both on an advanced basis and a current basis. In order to provide flexibility for the university with respect to structure and timing, you're being asked to authorize the issuance of tax-exempt and taxable bonds, or a combination thereof, in 1, 2, or 3 series and at 1 or more times. The university's current expectation, however, is that the bonds will be issued as 1 series of unenhanced fixed-rate bonds. David also mentioned a portion of that will be issued as a stepped coupon bond. It sounds like you guys have been through this recently, but just in case, it differs a little bit from a traditional fixed-rate bond in that it's fixed for specific periods of time through maturity, so you know in advance what your debt service will be, but the rate will change periodically. The amount of interest payable, just like a regular fixed-rate bond, will be established through final maturity in the bond series certificate. The 2008 general resolution provides for the issuance from time to time of multiple series of bonds, each separately secured from one another. And today would be special obligations to the authority payable solely out of the revenues, which consist of payments made by the institution under the loan agreement. Payment of the bonds is secured by the pledge and assignment made by the general resolution of the revenues and the funds and accounts established by the general resolution and the series resolutions. The series resolutions delegate to various officers of the authority the power to make the determinations described in our letter and to do all things necessary or convenient in connection with the sale and issuance of the bonds. And Douglas is going to talk a little bit about the loan agreement and other documents.
Thank you.
The authority and the university will execute a loan agreement in connection with each issuance of the bonds, which will require the university to make timely payments of debt service as applicable on the bonds. The institution's obligation to make payments under the loan agreement will be a general obligation. As stated before by David, consistent with the authority's recently adopted financing guidelines, there will be no security interest in any revenues or other property of the university's security university's obligations under the loan agreement executed in connection with the issuance of the bonds. As required by the authority's guidelines also, any loan agreement will contain a covenant by the university to retain a management consultant at the authority's discretion in the event that the university's credit rating falls below the criteria established by the guidelines. The bonds are proposed to be sold in negotiated sale to Morgan Stanley. The institution will enter into an agreement to provide continuing disclosure as well. Thank you.
Doug, thank you. Are there questions for David, Doug, or Chris? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the financing? Sandra, thank you. Charlie, thank you. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Gentlemen, thank you.
Chair, may I have a moment to say something?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, board members, this pipeline is an incredible pipeline. It really highlights the role and responsibility that DASNY has as a partner to some of the states and the nation's preeminent higher education institutions. We have a AAA rated credit, we have a AA rated credit, and a single A rated credit. These are stellar institutions. Want to highlight the importance and the reliance that these institutions and trust that they have in terms of DASNY partnering with them. It shows the work that we have done and the work that we continue to do. I would also add, as the forthcoming issue, we have another preeminent healthcare institution in the pipeline. So a lot of stuff going on, and we're very pleased to see this robust pipeline and hope to see more of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Thank you. We're going to go now to a resolution to proceed with the new financing, and Gerard's going to introduce it.
Behind tab 6 is the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center transaction. Matt Bergen will present the credit summary and staff report.
Good morning, everyone. Staff report provided to the members presents a 25-year term for a bond issue not to exceed $130 million on behalf of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, which is located in Manhattan. The project that you're considering this morning includes the expansion of an extension clinic in Commack, New York, the construction of a new laboratory building at 327 East 64th Street in Manhattan, as well as major medical equipment purchases and hospital renovations. The security features will include a general obligation of the Center Corporation, as well as guarantees from Sloan Kettering Institute for Cancer Research and SKI Realty, Inc. As this is a private placement, the bonds will not be rated. In an effort to accommodate the institution, we are bringing this to the board as a resolution to proceed and then to PACB before ultimately asking the board to adopt the documents. The institution felt there were certain efficiencies with this strategy, although they do qualify for DASNY's single approval. Regarding Memorial Sloan Kettering, this is a multi-billion-dollar corporation with nearly $9.5 billion in total assets, just over $4.1 billion in total liabilities, and nearly $5.4 billion in total net assets. Through September 30th of 2015, an operating gain of $143 million was recorded on approximately $2.7 billion of total operating revenues. Looking at liquidity, the institution recorded $620 million in cash and short-term investments as part of its $1.54 billion in current assets. Total contributions and pledges raised through fundraising efforts were over $750 million for the past 2 years combined. This AA-rated institution is world-renowned and is the premier institution for setting the standard of cancer care. Countless discoveries and clinical research have occurred here that have led to innovations in all areas of cancer diagnosis and treatment. Mr. Chairman.
Matt, thank you. Are there questions for Matt? Yes, Sandra.
So I might as well be consistent and ask about the project location itself. And this is a new building, right? That's replacing
Correct.
the existing building?
It's a new building, correct. And I did ask, and the institution said there was no community opposition.
Okay, thank you. Another question?
Please.
There's several references in here to the hospital needing to do fundraising in order to support these projects, and you note the success of their past fundraising efforts. Is a continuation of the fundraising efforts that they've made now be enough to support what we're going forward with here? Or are we assuming that they're going to be able to improve and raise even at an even higher level?
I would say that they would continue to raise funds consistent with their past. However, just looking at the last 2 years combined, $750 million. The amount not to exceed here is 130. So certainly their efforts to aid in fundraising, which ultimately aids in their liquidity, in this instance, outweighs the amount of money that they're borrowing.
So we can be comfortable with the need for the equity in fundraising that
Yes.
this is sufficient?
Yes.
Thank you.
Depending on the
This is the gold
reimbursement
standard.
rates.
This institution is the gold standard in raising capital and fundraising. It is clearly emulated across the nation or across the globe in terms of its ability to tap contributors at the smallest range and at the highest. So,
Now, I just wanted to be sure that we weren't just expecting them to do even more than that, but just to continue what they've been able to do in the past. And it sounds as though that's the case.
but that's a very
That's a high bar.
That's a very high bar that very few institutions can even meet.
And they have to maintain their reimbursement rates that they get from the
As-
federal government.
All the healthcare institutions that we have considered.
Always a question mark.
Yeah, and I should just mention, as I did yesterday's Finance Committee, that the federal government is proposing to, unless something changes, adjust hospital outpatient clinic rates for all hospitals across the country to be in line with the reimbursement received by other providers for similar patients with similar conditions. And that's expected to be a significant reduction in reimbursement for hospital outpatient, hospitals that have outpatient clinics that are not on the hospital campus, as is the case with Memorial Sloan Kettering's Memorial Hospital. So just keep aware of that. I've asked Matt to ask MSK to model out what the implications would be for its operations, so that we have that when we bring this back for adoption of documents.
And just as a note, their commercial and HMO payer mix is over 70%, but they only rely 26% on Medicare. But I have reached out to the institution and let them know your concern, Charlie.
And Charlie, this is a concern because their patient care model is moving toward outpatient care as opposed to admitted patients.
Absolutely, it is, and the MSK outpatient care model includes some very large outpatient clinics that they have,
Okay.
both in New York State and New Jersey.
Okay. Sandra, please.
Charlie, is this intended to discourage freestanding clinics?
I was asked a similar question yesterday. That's not the way the federal government envisions it. Although clearly it will have an impact on hospital operations. But the way the feds indicate the way they are approaching this change is to bring in hospital reimbursements in line with one another, regardless of who the provider is, so that their thinking is why should they have to pay a considerably higher reimbursement rate for the same treatment to the same type of individual, just because the provider is a hospital versus an outpatient clinic versus a doctor's office.
Is this, the Wall Street Journal reports today that they're talking about trying to make a switch between higher priced drugs to lower priced drugs in outpatient clinics by reducing the amount of money paid to the provider.
That's a different.
That's a different. That's